Have you ever felt completely drained from always putting others first, only to realize that your kindness sometimes comes back to bite you? Trust me, I know that feeling all too well. We're told from a young age to be compassionate and give selflessly, but what happens when being overly generous starts to take a serious toll on our well-being? In this video, I want to share some surprising ways being too kind can actually work against you, and more importantly, how you can protect yourself while still caring for others. Let's dive in and explore the balance between giving to others and giving yourself the respect you deserve. I'll get started with this in-depth exploration of how kindness, while noble, can sometimes work against us if not balanced properly. Here's the first elaborated idea. People will depend on you too much. When I first started helping out my friends and family regularly, I felt like I was making a difference. I'd be the person they'd call if they needed a ride, a listening ear, or help with a project. At first, it was heartwarming to feel needed, but slowly I noticed a shift. People began to expect my help rather than appreciate it. My phone would buzz constantly with requests that grew in size and frequency. A friend might call last minute, expecting me to drive an hour just to babysit, or a coworker would ask me to cover for them again. Over time, this constant giving made me feel exhausted and unappreciated. Instead of focusing on my own tasks and goals, I'd be scrambling to fulfill others' needs. I barely had time to breathe, and what was worse, the people I helped rarely considered that I had responsibilities of my own. They had grown so accustomed to my assistance that they assumed I was always available. The more I gave, the less I felt seen, and eventually the imbalance began to affect my peace of mind and energy levels. The Stoic principle of self-care and knowing when to prioritize oneself became vital for me. I had to learn to say no, even though it felt uncomfortable. Setting boundaries didn't mean I stopped caring. It just meant recognizing that if I neglected my well-being, I wouldn't have much left to give. It was tough to accept that some people wouldn't take it well, but I had to put my health and peace first. These days, I consciously choose when to offer my time, making sure my needs are met so I can show up fully for others without feeling overwhelmed. It's a balancing act, but one worth mastering. You'll attract opportunists. I used to think that being overly generous would naturally build stronger and deeper relationships. After all, I believed that helping others would create bonds rooted in gratitude and mutual support. But reality hit me hard when I noticed a pattern. Some people were only around when they needed something. I remember a particular friend from work who would always reach out when they needed help on a project or a favor. When I needed support or just wanted to hang out for fun, they were mysteriously unavailable. It started to feel like a one-sided transaction instead of a genuine friendship. I realized that my open-hearted generosity was like a beacon for opportunists. These people gravitated toward me, drawn by the idea that I'd always be there to lend a hand, share my resources, or offer emotional support. Instead of building connections that were mutually enriching, I found myself drained by interactions with people who only cared about what they could gain. They would soak up my energy, take what they needed, and vanish until the next time they were in need. There was no reciprocity, no sense of partnership, only depletion. It became clear to me that while kindness is a beautiful quality, it needs to be paired with discernment. Just because I had the ability to help didn't mean I was obligated to. The Stoics emphasize wisdom and the ability to judge situations wisely, and that wisdom became crucial. Now, I'm more intentional about where I invest my energy. I've learned to recognize when someone's presence in my life is opportunistic and to distance myself accordingly. It's not about withholding kindness. It's about protecting my spirit from those who don't value the relationship beyond what they can take from it. In the end, quality over quantity matters when it comes to who we let into our lives. You could miss out on self-care. Putting everyone else first feels noble at first, doesn't it? I remember thinking I was being the best version of myself when I made sacrifices to help others. Whether it was volunteering for a late-night project at work or spending an entire weekend helping a friend move, I was the person who would always say yes. But after a while, I noticed something concerning. I was neglecting my own needs. My physical and emotional health started to decline, and I was too drained to do anything about it. There was a day that really drove the point home. I had just spent hours running errands for my family, and by the time I got back home, I was completely spent. My muscles ached, and my mind was foggy. All I wanted was to rest, maybe take a hot bath or watch a movie, but another friend called asking for help. Despite being exhausted, I reluctantly agreed. I showed up for them, but internally I was resentful and angry. I realized that my selflessness was starting to feel more like a burden than a gift. Self-care isn't selfish, it's foundational. The Stoics teach that self-mastery and a well-ordered mind are crucial for a fulfilled life. I couldn't take care of anyone if I didn't first take care of myself. So, I started scheduling me time and protecting it fiercely. Whether it's a morning walk, a long bath, or just reading a book in peace, I prioritize those moments. If someone asks for my help during that time, I've learned to politely decline or reschedule. Now, I'm healthier, happier, and more genuinely present when I do choose to help others. It's not about doing less. It's about doing things from a place of abundance rather than exhaustion. People might think you're weak. It's hard to believe, but sometimes kindness can be interpreted as a lack of strength or confidence. I've experienced this firsthand. When I was younger, I thought being agreeable and accommodating would make me well-liked. I rarely spoke up for myself, rarely set boundaries, and always tried to make everyone happy. But instead of earning respect, I noticed people started treating me as if I couldn't stand up for myself. My peers at work began piling extra tasks onto me, assuming I wouldn't push back. Even friends would jokingly say, "Oh, you know they'll do it, they never say no." Deep down I felt frustrated and taken for granted, but I didn't want to risk disappointing anyone. This went on until a particularly eye-opening moment with a co-worker. I had just pulled an all-nighter finishing a report for them. And when I mentioned how tired I was, they shrugged and said, "You're too nice for your own good. You should have said no." It hit me. Even the people benefiting from my kindness saw me as a pushover. That stung, but it was the wake-up call I needed. The Stoic idea of self-discipline and asserting your boundaries became a guiding principle for me. I learned that being strong doesn't mean being harsh. It means valuing yourself enough to set limits. The first time I said no to an unreasonable request, I was terrified. But to my surprise, the world didn't end. In fact, people began respecting me more. They realized I had my own priorities and couldn't be guilted into overextending myself. It's about finding that balance, being kind, but not at the expense of your own dignity. Setting boundaries showed people I was not only kind, but also strong and self-respecting, and that changed everything. You might develop a habit of avoidance. Constantly focusing on others can sometimes be a way to run away from yourself, I used to fill my days with endless acts of service, staying busy to the point of exhaustion. It made me feel good on the surface, like I was doing something valuable. But when I was alone and things got quiet, a sense of discomfort would wash over me. If you've ever found yourself avoiding stillness because it brings up thoughts or emotions you'd rather not face, you'll know what I'm talking about. I had to confront the fact that my giving nature was sometimes a distraction from my own unresolved issues. If I kept my calendar packed with commitments, I didn't have to think about my insecurities or the lingering fears I hadn't dealt with. This realization came one weekend when all my plans fell through, and I was left with nothing but my thoughts. I felt a wave of anxiety, and it became clear that I had been using busyness as an emotional shield. The Stoics emphasized the importance of self-reflection and inner strength. I realized that running away from myself wasn't sustainable, so I started to create space in my life for introspection. It was difficult at first, but gradually I learned to face my feelings head-on. I journaled, practiced mindfulness, and even took long walks by myself to get comfortable with my own company. This self-awareness not only helped me grow, but also made my acts of kindness more genuine, as they were no longer fueled by a desire to escape my own struggles. It's about being there for others, while also being brave enough to face your own inner world. Your goals will be ignored. Have you ever felt like your dreams are slipping further away because you're too busy helping others with theirs? That was me. I had a long list of personal goals: writing a book, learning a new language, and even launching a passion project that I'd been dreaming about for years. But every time I thought I'd make progress, someone would call needing a favor. Of course, I'd say, pushing my goals aside. Whether it was helping a friend move or volunteering for an extra project at work, I constantly prioritized others. Before I knew it, years had passed, and my dreams remained just that, dreams. One of the hardest things to admit was that I was sabotaging my own potential. It wasn't just about being nice, it was about a fear of putting myself first. I thought people would label me as selfish or ungrateful. But the Stoics teach us the importance of living by reason and aligning our actions with our values. And my values included making my dreams a reality. This forced me to take a hard look at where my time and energy were going. I realized that saying yes to everything meant saying no to my own aspirations. So, I made a change. I started scheduling time for my goals, treating them with the same importance as I treated everyone else's needs. When someone asked for my help, I'd evaluate whether it aligned with my priorities. If it didn't, I'd politely decline or suggest a compromise. It wasn't easy, especially the first time I had to tell a friend I couldn't help them because I had my own commitments. But over time, I noticed a difference. My passion projects began to flourish, and I felt more fulfilled and in control of my life. Protecting your goals doesn't make you selfish. It ensures you're living a balanced, purposeful life. People will doubt your intentions. It's counterintuitive, but sometimes being too nice can make people suspicious. I experienced this with a colleague who once said, "Why are you always so helpful? What's your angle?" I was shocked. My intentions were pure, but to them, my generosity seemed too good to be true. In a world where people are used to hidden agendas and ulterior motives, extreme kindness can raise red flags. It's like when a stranger offers you free tickets or a too good to be true deal. You immediately wonder what the catch is. At first, this reaction hurt. I couldn't believe people would question my sincerity, but looking back, I can see how it might have seemed unusual. When people are too nice, especially in environments where trust is scarce, others can become wary. They wonder if you're trying to win favor or manipulate them in some way. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it made me realize that overextending myself might not be the best approach. The Stoics remind us to act in line with our values, regardless of how others perceive us. That wisdom helped me find a middle ground. I didn't stop being kind, but I did become more selective about where and how I invested my energy. Instead of spreading myself thin, I focused on meaningful acts of kindness for people I genuinely cared about. By being more intentional, I reduced the suspicion and created space for deeper, more authentic connections. I learned that quality trumps quantity in relationships, and kindness, when balanced with self-respect, carries more weight and credibility. You might end up feeling used. I remember a time when I was constantly there for everyone, always the dependable friend, the co-worker who'd cover extra shifts, the family member who'd drop everything to lend a hand. At first, it felt good to be needed, but that feeling quickly faded as I noticed a troubling pattern. People only reached out when they wanted something. Invitations to catch up or check in just to see how I was doing, almost non-existent. Slowly, I began to feel used, like a resource rather than a person with my own needs and emotions. It all came to a head when I helped a friend move, spending my entire weekend carrying boxes and organizing their new place. A few weeks later, I found myself in need of a favor, a small one, and that same friend was suddenly too busy. The disappointment cut deep, and I felt a wave of resentment. It wasn't the first time either. My acts of kindness were met with expectations, not appreciation, and that left me feeling drained and bitter. The Stoics teach us that emotional balance is crucial and that our peace of mind should never be dependent on others' behavior. I realized that I had to change how I gave, not to receive something in return, but to protect my own well-being. I started asking myself, am I giving because I truly want to, or am I giving out of obligation or a need for validation? If the answer was the latter, I paused. It's okay to be kind, but it's equally okay to protect yourself from feeling used. By being mindful of who I give to and why, I've learned to preserve my energy and ensure that I'm acting from a place of genuine care, not from a fear of disappointing others. Your kindness might enable irresponsibility. Have you ever found yourself doing so much for someone that they no longer felt the need to handle their own responsibilities? I've definitely been there. A close family member once struggled with managing their finances, and I would always swoop in to pay their bills or help them organize their expenses. I thought I was doing the right thing, being supportive and easing their burden. But in reality, my constant rescue missions enabled their financial irresponsibility. They didn't feel the pressure to learn or change because I was always there to save the day. It's a harsh reality. Sometimes our kindness can do more harm than good. The Stoics emphasize the importance of moderation and rational decision-making, and that applies to giving as well. If we constantly take over someone's responsibilities, we rob them of the opportunity to grow and become independent. This doesn't mean we shouldn't help. It means we should be mindful of how we help. Instead of always stepping in, we can offer guidance and support while still encouraging them to take ownership of their problems. Now, I'm more intentional about how I assist others. For that same family member, I stopped offering financial bailouts. Instead, I helped them set up a budget and encouraged them to seek advice from a professional. It wasn't easy to watch them struggle at first, but it was necessary for their growth. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is to let people learn from their mistakes and find their own strength. That's how we empower others without sacrificing our own peace. You'll feel overwhelmed and stressed. Being everyone's go-to helper might seem honorable, but it's a fast track to burnout. I used to say yes to everything, helping friends move, volunteering for extra work, taking care of family errands, and it left me feeling constantly overwhelmed. My schedule was packed to the point that I barely had time to rest or even enjoy simple things, like reading a book or taking a quiet walk. The stress built up, affecting not only my mental health but my physical well-being too. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing with all the things I had to do for everyone else. One morning, I woke up exhausted and thought, how did I get here? The answer was simple. I hadn't set boundaries. I was so focused on being available for everyone else that I neglected my own needs. The Stoics teach us the value of balance and self-control, and it became clear that I needed to make some changes. It was time to stop treating self-care as a luxury and start treating it as a necessity. I learned to say no without feeling guilty, and it was life-changing. I prioritized my well-being and even scheduled do-nothing time, where I could just relax or do something I loved. If a friend asked for help during my designated self-care hours, I'd explain that I had a prior commitment, even if that commitment was to myself. Setting these boundaries helped me show up more fully when I did choose to help, without feeling overburdened or stressed. It taught me that it's possible to be kind and generous without sacrificing my own peace and happiness. Strategies to protect yourself. Listen to your emotions. It took me a long time to realize that my body and emotions were trying to tell me something every time I felt burned out from helping others. I used to ignore those feelings, brushing them off as a sign that I just needed to work harder or be more selfless. But the truth is, our emotions and physical sensations are often our first indicators that something is off balance. There was a time when I agreed to help a friend organize a huge event. I thought it would be fun and rewarding, but as the weeks went by, I started feeling a heavy sense of dread and anxiety. I wasn't sleeping well, and I felt on edge every time my phone buzzed with another request for help. I'd push through, telling myself that feeling resentful wasn't kind or right, but the resentment kept building. Eventually, I snapped at my friend over something minor, and that's when I knew I had to pause and reflect. The Stoics emphasize the importance of self-awareness, and I realized I needed to honor my emotions instead of ignoring them. Our feelings serve as messengers, telling us when we've stretched ourselves too thin. Now, I pay close attention to how I feel when helping someone. If I notice that familiar anxiety creeping in or feel a wave of exhaustion, I give myself permission to step back. I might take a walk, meditate, or journal about what's bothering me. These moments of self-care allow me to reset and determine whether I'm giving from a place of genuine generosity or from obligation and burnout. By tuning into my emotions, I can make sure my kindness is sustainable and not at the cost of my own well-being. Embrace the power of saying no. Saying no used to make me feel like the worst person in the world. I'd imagine the disappointment in the other person's eyes, and guilt would eat me alive. But over the years, I've come to see that no is one of the most liberating and self-respecting words we can use. There was a time when I was juggling work, family commitments, and helping out at a community center. One evening, a friend asked if I could join a committee for a new project. My gut screamed no, but I felt too guilty to say it. So I agreed, even though it meant giving up my one free evening for self-care. Fast forward a month, and I was exhausted, stressed, and frustrated. I hadn't taken a single moment for myself, and I was growing resentful. That's when I realized that saying no wasn't selfish. It was necessary. The Stoics teach us that we must respect our own time and energy. So I practiced in front of the mirror, telling myself, it's okay to say no. Your well-being matters. When I finally said no to the next request, I felt a mix of relief and fear. But to my surprise, the world didn't collapse. People adjusted, and some even respected me more for setting boundaries. Now, I remind myself that no is not a rejection of the person asking. It's an affirmation of my own limits. It allows me to say yes to things that truly matter, with energy and joy. And when I do say yes, I know it's coming from a place of genuine willingness, not out of guilt or obligation. Schedule time. Just for yourself. Carving out time for myself used to feel like an indulgence I couldn't afford. My schedule was always filled with commitments, whether it was work projects, family responsibilities, or friends needing a hand. But one day I had a wake-up call. I was so worn out from running around non-stop that I came down with a fever and had to spend a whole weekend in bed. That forced rest made me realize how much I'd neglected myself. The Stoics talk about living in harmony with our nature, and part of that is recognizing when we need rest and solitude to recharge. So I started blocking out time on my calendar for self-care. It could be as simple as an hour to read a book, go for a walk, or even just sit quietly with a cup of tea. At first, I felt guilty. I'd think, what if someone needs me during this time? But I knew I had to protect it. When a friend called during one of my designated self-care hours, I simply said, I'm not available right now. Can we catch up later? It felt strange at first, but also incredibly empowering. Scheduling time for myself has become a non-negotiable part of my life. It's not about being unavailable to others. It's about being fully present when I do show up. By guarding this time fiercely, I've become more grounded, energized, and able to help others from a place of abundance rather than depletion. Now, self-care isn't a luxury. It's an essential part of my routine, and I'm all the better for it. Set clear boundaries. Identifying and dealing with energy vampires was one of the hardest but most necessary changes I had to make. We all know those people who leave us feeling exhausted after every interaction, right? For me, it was a former co-worker who would constantly vent about her problems but never seemed interested in solving them. Every conversation drained me, and I realized I was becoming a sounding board for someone who had no intention of changing or reciprocating support. Setting boundaries felt uncomfortable at first. I didn't want to come across as rude or unkind, but the Stoics emphasize that our well-being is our responsibility, and I had to take that to heart. I began to limit my interactions with this co-worker, gently steering conversations away from negativity or cutting them short when they became too draining. I'd say, I'm really sorry you're dealing with that, but I need to focus on some work right now. It wasn't easy, and I felt guilty for a while, but over time, I noticed how much lighter I felt when I prioritized my mental energy. It's not just about avoiding draining people, but also about nurturing relationships that uplift and inspire me. I've learned to protect my time and energy fiercely. If someone's presence consistently leaves me feeling worse, I limit my interactions or, in some cases, walk away entirely. It's about valuing my own well-being as much as I value others. And by doing so, I've made space for people who bring joy, wisdom, and balance into my life. Setting boundaries doesn't make me less kind. It makes me healthier and stronger, which ultimately allows me to give more authentically. Being kind is one of life's greatest virtues, but when taken to the extreme, it can backfire. The Stoic philosophy reminds us that everything should be done in moderation, including generosity. By setting boundaries, being intentional about where we direct our energy, and remembering to take care of ourselves, we can continue to be kind without feeling used, stressed, or depleted. It's all about finding that sweet spot, the balance between giving to others and honoring our own needs. Remember, you deserve the same kindness you show to everyone else, and sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to respect your own well-being. Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery and balance. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more wisdom rooted in Stoic principles. Your support helps this channel grow, and I'm so grateful to have you here.